and then they have.
Business, I think, is to congratulate ourselves on Howard Dean's elevation to chair of the DNC.
Acclamation, absolutely.
Good. And Dean is standing here beside a DNC ambulance, and there's a donkey on the ground that's just been run over or hit by a Mack truck or something. And Dean is saying, "Everybody back! This isn't going to be pretty." And the crowds are holding back the thing. And there's another great one here that was I thought everybody would like because it might refer to us because it has a castle, and on the castle it says mainstream media.
Yeah.
And the king is in the tower. This was in the Daily News, the Anchorage Daily News as well. He says, "The bloggers are at the gates, sire." And the king says, "Really, have them go away at once." And somebody is saying, "Too late, I fear. And tell them to go to Bloggery." And there's this mob of barbarians at the gates with a battering ram and ladders coming up.
But
you doing,
and of course, I also spent 10 years in the legislature, and you don't get you get the state retirement the same as others. The years I spent in the legislature, we had I got the pay at the same level as Xerox Operator 1 in 1980, and it stayed the same for years. But anyway, I get $1,600 a month, and I had worked for the Beth Steel shipyards in Hoboken. I worked for Co-op Wholesale as a warehouseman, all this outside. Came up here, I worked for the FE company on the dredges because I was an electrician that worked on the ships. A dredge is a ship, it even had seagulls going after it. but anyway, you know, and stuff like that. And unfortunately, I was a little too good at being the grievance man for the union. I won too many cases, so they figured out a way to reorganize the electric shop so that they wouldn't need my services anymore. They didn't fire me. But I get $212 a month Social Security, and that, you know, that ain't it ain't a hell of a lot.
No.
I get back less than I paid in. But that was, so they screwed around with Social Security for a lot of people even before. And so I think we should go back to the original, FDR's original setup. But of course, Georgie Porgy is not in favor of anything like that.
He's right. If you work for a non-covered system like the university or the state, so and you've also worked for Social Security in the past, some of your Social Security that you paid into will go away.
Actually, I think all of mine will go away because I haven't worked sufficient quarters.
Yeah, you're teaching, right?
Yes.
Hey, David.
Bingo.
As a union.
But actually, the university, you can also get TRS, but then that's
I had the option and I went the other way. But yeah.
well, actually, TIAA is probably the best looking at it
And
compared to the other.
As a union guy, I know what this is. This is a pension fund. And I think it's really important to remember, the most important thing we have to remember is that it's our money. And this is our money that has been put into a pension fund. And this is what's going on here is it's been invested into U.S. government bonds, and the bonds are in this trust fund. And all of a sudden, the government doesn't want to make good on those U.S. bonds, which are just like the savings bonds you and I, you know, my mom has been buying since World War II, you know, I mean, and what's happened is our money in the pension fund has been invested in U.S. savings bonds, and now the government's talking about not paying them off and using the money for something else. Now, this is just like as if a union official were to take a union pension fund, and it's illegal to put that money into anything else but the pension fund, but they're taking the union pension fund and they're using it for other things like tax cuts. Imagine they gave out the money to the top 1% of the union and kind of schmoozed it away, you know, then, you know, I mean, they'd be in jail for racketeering. The FBI would be on them. What's happened is they've taken this pension fund, which is supposed to be separate, they put the money somewhere else, and now they're not, it's our money, and now they don't want to give it back to us. And that's what we've really got to emphasize, is that this is just like a union pension fund. It's supposed to be separate. The money has been invested in U.S. savings bonds. Now Bush talks about not paying the money back into to the savings bonds. And it's our money, and they're going to use it for something else.
Well, so, there's another dimension to that. If you get so I think that's a great point that that they're spending other people's money, that they're going to default on debt to the American public. But if they default on that debt, that also sends a signal to financial markets around the world that they're going to default on their treasury bonds.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what the federal government doesn't want to do
Apparently,
right now.
the expression "full faith and credit" to the United States means nothing to them.
Well, no, but they're never going to do anything like that. I mean, they would never risk it. It doesn't have anything to do with spending your money. It has to do with spending the South Koreans and the Chinese's money. They can't default on that.
Well, did you notice the other day when South Korea talked about putting some of their money into other currencies?
They talked about diversifying their portfolio.
And everybody shook and said, "Is this the crash?" Because once they start not counting on or not having faith in U.S. government bonds, that whole we could be headed for another depression.
So what I'm saying is, I think that's a great point, a great argument against him. But the federal government can't really do that. I mean, that's an idle threat on their part to not honor those. They simply, for the signals that it would send to the financial markets, they really couldn't realistically do it. There are enough intelligent people, even still in the government, to not do something as catastrophically bad as that.
What I worry about with this is if it's the government paying the government, could you envision politically them making an exception for those particular T-bonds? Say, these T-bills are special because they were purchased by the federal government, from the federal government, and this doesn't do anything to the rest of our full faith and credit.
But wait a minute, so T-bills are regarded as the safest investment in the world. So even if they made that one exception, what stops them from making the second exception? So if you're a Japanese banker, or doesn't this go through your head?
Well, it would be the same thing that would stop the first exception to the rule, which is, we don't want to compromise full faith and
Well,
credit.
that's what I'm saying. So I think for the same reason that they don't want to make an exception, because they don't want that Japanese or that Chinese banker thinking, well, if they made one exception, what stops them from making two?
Krugman has already been this route, and he points out that, and there is a way. And Krugman has pointed out that the bonds are U.S. guaranteed. The trust fund is required to pay benefits, full benefits, so long as there's money in the trust fund, which means it's required to demand the redemption of those bonds. But Congress, this is the point I was thinking of, is Congress can reduce the benefit, the payment levels on which benefits are paid. They can reduce to 70% payment, or they can reduce the benefits. They can, by law, reduce the benefits paid on Social Security to the point where they correspond with what's coming in. At which point the government never has to redeem those bonds. It never has to touch the trust fund. Do you see what I mean?
Yep.
And they never have to default on the bonds because the redemption of the bonds
They're
is never demanded.
You just held
demanded.
indefinitely.
You just